Hello there everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got 10 essential Star Wars Legends books that every single Star Wars fan should read. With my recommendations here, I will be focusing on not just the books that I think are essential to understanding the story of Star Wars, but frankly a lot of the books that I think are generally the best in Star Wars Legends. I'm going to be breaking them down from most beginner-friendly all the way to least beginner-friendly. As always, when we're getting started in these videos, make sure you're hitting that like button. It helps me out a lot with the channel. Subscribe for more content. Comment below, let me know your favorites of all these books if you've read them or if this video was helpful to you. Well, we'll start off with the obvious one, the one that started, for all intents and purposes, Star Wars Legends, and that is the Thrawn Trilogy. There's not much to say about the Thrawn Trilogy that hasn't already been said. It's an excellent series that really captures the magic of the original trilogy while continuing it with the Rebellion versus the Empire conflict. This, of course, was the series that introduced Grand Admiral Thrawn, a humanoid alien of the Chiss species with blue skin and red glowing eyes. Grand Admiral Thrawn is leading a last-ditch effort from the Imperial Remnant to fight back against the Rebellion and New Republic. Opposing him is, of course, our main cast of the original trilogy: Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa Solo, now married to Han Solo, Chewbacca, C-3PO, R2-D2, Lando Calrissian, Wedge Antilles, Mon Mothma, Admiral Akbar. The list goes on and on. Every big character from the original trilogy is here. Plus, this is the series that introduced some of the best Star Wars Legends characters that grow throughout the entire continuity, that being not just Thrawn, but also Mara Jade and Talon Karrde. The Thrawn trilogy also attempts to provide context to many early Star Wars concepts, touching on cloning what Jedi used to look like in the grand days of the Republic, and really pushing the boundaries of the power of the Force. The Thrawn trilogy is the most essential of all the essential Star Wars Legends books, and I would highly recommend you start with the Thrawn trilogy. If you haven't read the Thrawn trilogy, then you're missing out on a major piece of Star Wars history. The second essential Star Wars book or book series I recommend you read is, of course, the Jedi Academy trilogy, written by Kevin J. Anderson. The Jedi Academy trilogy takes place in 11 ABY, approximately 2 years after the events of the Thrawn trilogy. In this trilogy, Luke Skywalker gets approval from the New Republic Senate to rebuild the Jedi Order, thus creating his new Jedi Order. Luke's new Jedi Order and the Jedi Order itself perpetuating into the Legends universe really all starts here. That, coupled with a bunch of the new characters introduced for the first time in this trilogy, like Natassi Dalla and Kip Duron. The Jedi Academy trilogy is one of the most essential Star Wars stories for understanding the rest of Star Wars Legends. It's definitely my least favorite book series out of all the ones I'm going to be listing here. However, I do think, like the Thrawn trilogy, this is essential for you to understand the breadth of the Star Wars EU. Next, we're going to pull it back a bit for our third entry here. We're going to go all the way back to 1,000 years before the events of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and talk about the Darth Bane trilogy. The Darth Bane trilogy follows the titular character of Darth Bane as he sheds the weakness of the ruling body of the Sith at the time, the Brotherhood of Darkness, and attempts to push the Sith into the future with the Rule of Two. All three books cover about 30 years in time, from Bane's early days in the Sith Order, learning how to become a dark side user, all the way to when he takes on his own Padawan, Darth Zana. The Darth Bane trilogy is violent, brutal, very dark, and very much so Sith. But the Sith and the Rule of Two being one of the most interesting concepts from the Star Wars prequels, I absolutely think the Darth Bane trilogy is essential for your understanding of Star Wars. And on top of all of that, the Darth Bane trilogy is just an excellent group of books. I highly recommend you read this. We're going to move back into the prequel era for our fourth entry here, and we're going to talk about Shatterpoint, a Clone Wars novel. Many of you are probably fans of the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars series from 2003 to 2005, but what you might not have known was that there was a multimedia initiative attached to the project of the Clone Wars TV series. Shatterpoint, also called Shatterpoint, a Clone Wars novel, is a story that centers around Mace Windu. Shatterpoint gives life to what was otherwise a character who is pretty static. The story sees Mace Windu travel back to his home planet of Harun Kal in an attempt to find his former Padawan Depa Billaba, a member of the Jedi Council. While Mace is there, he gets caught up in the Summertime War, dealing with, among other things, the religious consequences of war and the toll it takes on his people. The story goes into the psyche of Mace Windu and has often been compared to the film Apocalypse Now. On top of that, you get other reasons why Mace Windu is so cool, exploring both his Shatterpoint ability, the ability for him to perceive weaknesses in his opponents, as well as really diving into the lightsaber form of a pod in which Mace Windu created. Out of all the Clone Wars stories that you could possibly watch or read, this one feels the most dark, disturbing, and grounded in the sense of a Vietnam War film. If you're looking for a very different type of Star Wars story, but also one that enhances a character that you might have thought was cool, but didn't have much substance to him, Shatterpoint is your Star Wars book. For number 5, we're going to talk about novelizations with Star Wars, and there's no better Star Wars novelization than Matthew Stover's 2005 novelization of Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith is one of Star Wars' best stories, even as the film, but the novelization, getting into the characters' heads, getting to see a lot of the stuff that was cut out from the film back into the novel, connecting it with the larger expanded universe. The novelization really is the ultimate experience if you are an EU fan. And as somebody whose favorite Star Wars movie is Revenge of the Sith, this is basically Revenge of the Sith, but more. I highly recommend you read this, and if you'd like to couple it with the other 2/3 of the Dark Lord trilogy, as it's been called, with James Luceno's Labyrinth of Evil and Darth Vader Dark Lord of the Sith, I highly recommend that. It is by far the best trilogy involving Darth Vader out of anything in Star Wars Legends. We're going to continue the trend of enhancing characters we know and love from the films, and I'm going to say the next essential Star Wars book you have to read is Kenobi. Kenobi takes place shortly after the events of Revenge of the Sith, telling the story of Obi-Wan's first days of self-exile on the planet Tatooine, and how he ingratiates himself into the lives of everyday Tatooine citizens. To boil it down, it's the transitionary story from Obi-Wan Kenobi to Ben Kenobi. Obi-Wan is struggling in this novel not just with what happens in Revenge of the Sith, but really giving up his life as a Jedi Master. His need, his drive to help protect people has to be suffocated in order to protect Luke Skywalker. It's a really fascinating standalone piece with some great new characters, as well as an awesome look at the Tusken Raiders, a more humanizing look at the Tusken Raiders, as well as strong connections to the rest of the EU from the Tusken Raider standpoint. If you're a fan of Obi-Wan Kenobi or the Dark Times era, you absolutely have to read Kenobi. Next up, we're going to be talking about the Han Solo trilogy by A.C. Crispin. We get to see Han's rise from a street urchin on Corellia, through his time in the Imperial Academy, to his time as an Imperial fugitive working for the Hutts, and eventually his time obtaining the Millennium Falcon. The Han Solo trilogy is the seminal origin story for one of our most beloved characters, and it absolutely needs to be read if you're a major fan of the films. My 8th recommendation is going to be Shadows of the Empire. Shadows of the Empire was the original bridge novel between the events of Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, and Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. It was a part of a larger multimedia initiative including comic books, video games, trading cards, a soundtrack, toy line. It was a massive event, and the novel was the centerpiece of the whole thing. In the novel, we see Princess Leia mount a rescue mission in order to save Han Solo before he can be taken to Jabba the Hutt. Meanwhile, Darth Vader is scouring the galaxy for Luke Skywalker, as Prince Shizor, the cunning and ruthless leader of a powerful crime syndicate, attempts to pit himself against Darth Vader for the favor of Emperor Palpatine. Shadows of the Empire is a tight and interesting novel, but really its significance is the reason it's on this list, both as the centerpiece for Star Wars' first big multimedia initiative, as well as the lore it establishes and sets up for the rest of the Star Wars EU. My 9th recommendation for essential Star Wars reads is going to be the X-Wing series. Specifically, I'm going to focus on the first 4 books titled the Rogue Squadron series. The first 4 books in the series, X-Wing Rogue Squadron, X-Wing Wedge's Gamble, X-Wing The Krytos Trap, and X-Wing The Back to War, were all written by Michael A. Stackpole. They tell the story of Rogue Squadron, including the members Wedge Antilles and Corran Horn. Wedge gets major character development in this series, and across the entire X-Wing series, it really makes him one of the standout characters in all of the Star Wars EU. Corran Horn is also an essential Star Wars character to know, but he is, for all intents and purposes, the main character of this series, and he is incredibly important to the rest of the Star Wars story. Plus, events like the freeing of Coruscant are in this novel, as well as other original bad guys like Isan Izard. I highly recommend this series, especially as a change of pace from the rest of the stuff I've listed. Even though Corran and Wedge are the main characters, this is really an ensemble novel series. It has a great cast of characters with fun banter and exciting stories, all centering around space battle and dogfights. If you like that side of Star Wars, definitely check this out. And if you love that, continue reading with the Wraith Squadron series as well as the other standalone tie-ins. And the final essential Star Wars book that I'm going to recommend every Star Wars fan read, I might have saved the best for last. It is certainly my favorite Star Wars novel of all time, and that is Darth Plagueis. One of the reasons I mentioned Darth Plagueis last is because Darth Plagueis really brings in a whole wide range of Star Wars EU content. You don't have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the Star Wars EU, but you have to be at least aware of a lot of events across the EU. This is certainly not a book for beginners, but if you're an EU fan, and if you're just a Star Wars fan in general, a fan of the Sith, a fan of the Jedi, especially a fan of the prequel era or Palpatine, this is an incredible book. James Luceno commands this book so well. He dives in to the brilliant backstory behind Emperor Palpatine, as well as the mad scientist machinations of his master Darth Plagueis. This is both, in my opinion, the essential dark side book to read, as well as the essential Palpatine book to read. If you've found Palpatine one note as a villain in the past, I think this will give a lot more grandness and depth to his plans and his machinations throughout the entire Skywalker saga. Again, it's not really for beginners, but if you've read the rest of the stuff I've recommended that you have to read, if you are familiar with the wider Star Wars universe, especially in Legends, I think you will enjoy this book as much as I do. The last thing I'm going to mention, and you can take this as an honorable mention, is going to be the New Jedi Order. Now, I didn't include the New Jedi Order on this list because this list is the 10 essential Star Wars books to read, and there are 19 books alone in the New Jedi Order. For those of you who don't know, the New Jedi Order is a series of books that continues after the events of the Bantam era of the Star Wars expanded universe into the future, pushing the Jedi Order, Luke's New Jedi Order, the New Republic, and the Imperial Remnant in conflict with the Yuuzhan Vong, invaders from another galaxy. It's an exciting, gripping, and frankly universe-defining story in Star Wars. However, because there were so many books, I didn't want to put it as one of the entries. I mean, that would basically double the list. But if you love the rest of the EU, especially if you've read a lot of the 90s books, especially if you're really interested in what happens after Return of the Jedi, or you like the Solo children, the New Jedi Order is absolutely essential for you to continue reading with. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you hit that like button like I said earlier. Subscribe to the channel for more Star Wars content like this. I will be doing a canon version of this list as well. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.